Take it off, he said, and the girl stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Take the coat. I'm not asking. She was 17 years old, shaking so hard her teeth clicked together like a stuck engine, and she looked at him with eyes that had already given up. Ethan Cole had $37 in his wallet, a father's coat on his back, and exactly 0 reasons to stop. He stopped anyway. If this story already has you leaning forward, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. Now let's go. The cold that night in Billings, Montana was not the kind you complained about. It was the kind that made decisions for you. It got inside your lungs before you even opened the door, wrapped itself around your ribs, and squeezed until breathing felt like a negotiation. The radio in the break room at Kellerman's Auto and Repair had been running weather warnings since 4 in the afternoon, wind chill dropping to -22 black ice on every surface. The kind of advisory that used the words life-threatening without apology. Ethan Cole had heard all of it. He'd nodded at the radio the way you nod at something you can't do anything about, pulled on every layer he owned, and walked out into it anyway. He was 29 years old. He worked 6 days a week doing oil changes and brake jobs and engine diagnostics for a garage that paid him $14 an hour and expected 15 hours of work out of 12. He lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment off Broadwater Avenue where the radiator knocked all night and the landlord charged $900 a month and called it affordable. He had a truck that needed a new alternator, a phone with a cracked screen, and a father's coat. That coat was the thing people noticed. Heavy canvas exterior wool lining the color of oatmeal. 2 big patch pockets on the front that could hold your hands and half your dignity at the same time. His father, Raymond Cole, had bought it from a surplus store in 1987 and worn it for 23 years before arthritis took his hands and a stroke took the rest of him. Ethan had been wearing it for the 6 years since. It was not a fashionable coat. It was a warm coat. In Montana in January, that was not a small distinction. He left the garage at 8:14. He knew the time because he checked his phone right as he stepped outside, and the cold hit him so fast his eyes watered. He had 4 blocks to walk to the bus stop, then a 12-minute ride, then another 6 blocks to his apartment. He'd done it 100 times. He knew every crack in the sidewalk, every corner where the wind cut sideways, every overhang that gave you 3 seconds of relief before the gust came back. He made it 2 blocks before he heard it. Not a scream. A scream would have been easier to ignore. Your brain files screams under someone else's problem faster than you'd like to admit. This was something smaller. A sound like an animal that had stopped fighting and was just waiting. High-pitched and broken, coming from the narrow gap between a closed pawn shop and a dumpster that smelled like motor oil and wet cardboard. Ethan stopped walking. He stood there for 3 full seconds. The wind pushed against him. The cold climbed up under his collar. Every sensible part of his brain said, keep moving, call 911 from the bus. You're going to freeze, standing still. This is not your business. He stepped into the alley. She was wedged against the back wall, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself in a way that looked less like comfort and more like she was trying to compress herself small enough to disappear. She had on a hoodie gray thin, the kind you'd wear in October, not January. No gloves, no hat. Her hair was dark and loose and wet at the ends, frozen into stiff strands that didn't move when the wind came through. She was shaking so violently that Ethan could hear it, the small, rapid chattering of her teeth, the tremor running through her shoulders. He crouched down. Hey! Her head came up, and her eyes were wild and dark, and she shrank back against the wall like he was the worst thing that had happened to her, which, given the look of her, was saying something. I'm not going to hurt you, he said. He held up both hands. I'm just a guy. I work at the garage 2 blocks over. I heard you. She didn't speak. She just stared. How long have you been out here? Her mouth moved. Nothing came out. Can you talk to me? What's your name? Go away. Her voice was barely there, thin as paper cracked at the edges. Please, just go away. I can't do that. He wasn't sure why he said it that way. Not, I won't. I can't. Like it wasn't even a choice anymore. You're going to get hypothermia if you stay out here. Your core temperature's already dropping. I can tell by the shaking. You don't know anything about me. I know you're freezing. He paused. That's enough. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that stopped him cold, colder than the air, colder than the wind. She said it quietly with the exhausted flatness of someone stating a fact they'd already made peace with. If someone finds me, they'll kill me. Ethan didn't move. He held her gaze. His first instinct was to ask who, and his second instinct told him that asking who would get him nothing except her shutting down completely. So instead, he asked the question that actually mattered right now. Are they looking for you tonight? She hesitated. Then she nodded once. Okay. He exhaled. He sat down on his heels, not towering over her, making himself smaller. Then you can't stay here because this is the first place they'd look. And you can't stay outside because the weather's going to finish what they started. He waited for that to land. So we need to figure out something else. There's nothing else. There's always something else. He didn't know if he believed that. He said it because she needed to hear it. There's a diner 3 blocks east of here. Lou's, you know it? She blinked. The name registered barely, but it registered. It's open all night. Booths in the back. You get coffee, you stay warm. Nobody's going to ask you questions. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He had $37. He counted out 20 and held it toward her. This'll cover you for a few hours. Coffee, food, whatever you need. She stared at the money. She didn't take it. I don't... Her voice broke. She tried again. I can't go anywhere looking like this. Someone will call someone. Lou's not that kind of place. Trust me. I don't trust anyone. Fair. He kept the money extended. You don't have to trust me. You just have to take the $20. Another long pause. The wind howled through the alley and she flinched hard against it. And that flinch, that involuntary, helpless shudder was what did it. Ethan Cole stood up. He reached up to his collar and he started unbuttoning the coat. She watched him. What are you doing? What does it look like? Stop. No, that's you can't. It's -20 outside. -22, actually. He shrugged the coat off his shoulders. The cold hit him like a wall, like someone had replaced the air with ice water. Come on, stand up. I'm not taking your coat. Yeah, you are. He held it open. Because you're 17, maybe 18 years old, you're in a hoodie in a blizzard, and you said someone's going to kill you. And I've had this coat for 6 years, and my dad had it for 23 before that, so I know it holds up. He paused. Stand up. She didn't move. Stand up, he said again, quieter this time, and something in the way he said it, not a command, not a demand, just a simple fact about what needed to happen next, got through to her. She stood up. She was taller than he'd expected, younger looking up close. There were tears on her face that had half frozen at the corners of her eyes, and her lips were the wrong color, and her hands, when she finally extended them, were shaking so hard she nearly knocked the coat out of his grip. He helped her into it. He buttoned the top 2 buttons himself because her fingers wouldn't cooperate. He pressed the $20 into her palm and closed her fingers around it. Lou's Diner, 3 blocks east. Stay in the back booth. Don't talk to anyone who comes looking for you. He stepped back. You understand? She looked up at him. For the first time since he'd walked into that alley, she really looked at him, like she was trying to memorize his face, like she was trying to understand what category of human being did something like this. Why? She whispered. He thought about that for a second. Because it's cold, he said, and because you needed it more than I did tonight. He turned and walked back out of the alley before she could say anything else. The cold that hit him without the coat was a different order of magnitude. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was active. It was aggressive. It pushed through his flannel shirt and his thermal undershirt and his jeans like they weren't there, went straight for his skin, found every nerve ending it could reach and lit them up. He put his head down and he walked. He made it to the bus stop in 5 minutes. It felt like 30. His hands were inside his shirt, pressed against his stomach, and his teeth had started the same chattering he'd heard from that girl in the alley. And he stood under the shelter and told himself it was fine. It was 4 minutes to the next bus. He'd been colder than this, which was not true, but was a useful thing to tell himself. The bus was 7 minutes late. By the time it arrived, Ethan's fingers had gone from painful to numb, which he knew was not an improvement. He climbed on, slid his car, dropped into the nearest seat. The heat inside was overwhelming and wonderful, and his body responded to it with a full-body shiver that rattled his spine. The woman across the aisle glanced at him, No coat, visibly shaking, slightly blue around the fingers, and then looked away, which was a very human thing to do, and he didn't hold it against her. He rode the bus. He got off at his stop. He walked the 6 blocks. He made it inside his apartment before his legs gave out. He caught himself on the kitchen counter, stood there for a minute, breathing hard, waiting for his body to decide which direction it was going to go. The radiator was knocking. The apartment smelled like old coffee and engine grease. He turned on the hot water in the shower, got the temperature as high as it would go, and sat on the floor of the tub with the water running over him until his hands turned red and the feeling came back in his fingertips in a flood of pins and needles that made him hiss through his teeth. He lay awake that night wondering if she'd made it to the diner. He told himself she had. She'd looked like a survivor, even half frozen, even terrified, even hollow-eyed and shaking. There was something in her that wasn't done fighting yet. He could usually tell the difference. He'd grown up around people who'd given up and people who hadn't, and she hadn't. He fell asleep around 2 in the morning and dreamed about his father's coat. 3 days. That was how long it took for Ethan's body to register its formal objection to what he'd done. The fever hit him the next morning, low grade at first, the kind you try to work through, then high enough by noon that his supervisor, Marcus, sent him home with the particular brand of annoyance that men who'd never been seriously cold in their lives reserved for people they thought were being dramatic. "Take tomorrow off, too," Marcus said, not making it sound like generosity. Ethan took tomorrow off, and the next day, he lay in bed with 2 blankets and a space heater running, and his phone propped on his chest, checking the local news with the specific anxiety of someone waiting for a story that might or might not appear. There was nothing. No reports of a teenage girl found dead in an alley off 2nd Avenue. No missing persons bulletin that matched. Either she'd made it somewhere safe or no one was looking in the right direction. He chose to believe she'd made it. By the 3rd day, he was upright, shaky, pale, $12 poorer at the drugstore on cold medicine, but upright. He went back to work on a Thursday morning that was still bitter cold, but 10 degrees warmer than the night in question, which felt almost balmy by comparison. Marcus gave him a look that said, "Try not to almost die again," and handed him a work order for a transmission flush. The morning was ordinary. The afternoon was ordinary. He did the transmission flush. He rotated 4 sets of tires. He changed a serpentine belt on a 2009 F150, while the owner stood nearby and offered unhelpful commentary about how they didn't make trucks like they used to. He was under the hood of a late-model Silverado at 3:47 in the afternoon when he heard the first engine. He didn't think anything of it. This was a garage. Engines were the background noise of his life, as unremarkable as the wind. He kept working. Then there was another, lower, longer, a different pitch. Then another. He pulled his head out from under the hood. The kid who swept up a 19-year-old named Dev, who had 3 earrings and strong opinions about energy drinks, was standing in the middle of the shop floor with a broom in his hand and his mouth open. Marcus had come out of his office. The other mechanic, a quiet older man named Ron, who'd been working at Kellerman's for 19 years and claimed nothing could surprise him anymore, had straightened up from the car he was working on and taken off his glasses. They were all looking at the same thing. The windows of the garage faced the street. Through them, Ethan could see the shapes moving past large dark chrome, catching the afternoon light. Motorcycles. Not 1 or 2, not a group of weekend riders heading to a bar. Dozens of them, moving in tight formation with the unhurried certainty of people who had nowhere to be except exactly where they were going. They turned into the parking lot. The building shook. That was the only word for it. When 40-something motorcycles cut their engines within seconds of each other, the silence that followed has weight, and the silence after the engines died hit the garage like a physical thing, a pressure drop, a held breath, an absence that was louder than the noise. Nobody moved inside the shop. Through the windows, Ethan could see them getting off their bikes. Black leather, vest patches, the kind of deliberate, measured movement that comes from men who have never once had to prove they were dangerous because it was simply understood. They didn't rush. They didn't cluster nervously. They spread out around the lot with the quiet efficiency of people who knew how to hold ground. "What is that?" Deb whispered. "Hell's Angels," Ron said. He said it the way you'd say tornado, factual quiet with the underlying understanding that the appropriate response was to stop moving. Marcus was at Ethan's shoulder. "You know anything about this?" Ethan was looking at the man walking toward the front of the building. Big, not just tall, constructed, wide through the chest and shoulders in the way that suggested a life's worth of physical labor rather than a gym, the kind of mass that doesn't apologize for itself. He had a beard that was more gray than black, kept close, and his face was the kind of face that had been in weather for 40 years, lined and set, and currently carrying an expression that Ethan couldn't quite read from this distance. Could have been anger. Could have been something else. In his right hand hanging loose at his side, he carried a coat. Heavy canvas exterior. Wool lining. 2 big patch pockets on the front. Ethan's legs went slightly strange beneath him. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I might." The man pushed open the front door of the garage with one hand, not hard, not aggressive, just the door pushing of a man who was accustomed to doors opening for him. He stepped inside. Behind him, 2 others came in, staying near the door, not advancing, just present, making the room smaller by existing in it. The shop had gone completely silent. Dev had lowered the broom without seeming to know he'd done it. Ron had put his glasses in his shirt pocket. Marcus stood very still in the way that large men sometimes go still when they encounter someone whose size they can't account for through simple presence. The man stopped in the middle of the floor. He looked around the shop, not searching exactly, more like taking inventory. Then his eyes found Ethan. They stayed there. "Who works here?" he said. His voice was low and flat, the kind that carried without being raised, because it had learned long ago it didn't need to be. "We all do," Marcus said carefully. "I'm not asking all of you." He didn't look at Marcus. He kept looking at Ethan. He held up the coat. "I'm asking who gave this to a girl in an alley on 2nd Avenue on Tuesday night." The shop was so quiet that Ethan could hear the fluorescent light above the tool chest buzzing softly. He took one breath, then he stepped forward. "I did," he said. The man looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, more like refocusing, like a lens adjusting, like whatever he'd expected the answer to look like, Ethan Cole was not it. "You work here?" "Yes." "You were walking home Tuesday night in that cold?" "Yes." "And you just—" He stopped. His jaw worked once. "You found her in an alley." "She was behind the pawn shop on 2nd, between the building and the dumpster." Ethan kept his voice steady. "She had a hoodie on, no gloves. I don't know how long she'd been there." "How did she look?" The question came out rough, something underneath it that the flatness of his voice was working hard to hold down. "She looked like she had maybe another hour," Ethan said honestly. "Maybe less." The man's hand tightened on the coat. His knuckles went white against the canvas. He exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate, the breathing of someone who had been taught, or had taught himself to control, what the body wants to do when it's afraid. "She told you someone would hurt her," he said. It wasn't a question. "She said if someone found her, they'd kill her." Ethan paused. "I didn't ask who. It didn't seem like the right moment." Another long silence. "So you gave her your coat and $20 and told her to go to Lou's Diner on 5th and stay in the back booth." The man looked down at the coat in his hand. He turned it once like he was confirming something, checking the patch pocket maybe, or the frayed 2nd button, or something that told him this was real and not a story someone had made up. When he looked back up, the expression on his face had changed. "Her name is Harper," he said. "She's my daughter." The word daughter landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Ethan watched the man's face while he said it and saw for just 1 second the thing behind the controlled flat voice and the set jaw and the 40 years of weather, a man who had come very close to losing the most important thing he had and was only now beginning to understand how close. "William Reynolds," the man said. He extended the hand not holding the coat. "They call me Grip." Ethan shook it. "Ethan Cole." "Cole." Grip nodded once. "You probably want to know what happens next." "Honestly," Ethan said, "I just want to know she's okay." Grip looked at him. The fluorescent light buzzed. Outside, 40-some motorcycles sat quiet in the parking lot, and their riders stood equally quiet, and the whole world seemed to be waiting. "She's okay," Grip said. His voice was still flat, still controlled, but something in the word okay had weight to it, the weight of a word that had 3 nights ago been in real danger of never being applicable again. "She's okay because of you." He set the coat on the tool chest next to Ethan. Then he pulled out a phone, dialed a number, and said without preamble, "Tell the others to stand down. We found him." A pause. No, stand down. Another pause, and when he spoke again, there was a quiet finality to it that left no room for follow-up questions. Because he's not what I thought he was. He hung up. Ethan looked at the coat. He looked at Grip. He thought about Harper's face in the alley, wild and dark-eyed, and convinced that the world had nothing left to offer her. And he thought about the way she'd looked at him right before he walked away, like she was trying to understand what category of person did what he'd just done. He was starting to wonder if Grip was asking himself the same question. She's been through something, Ethan said carefully. Whatever it was, whoever was looking for her, she was frightened in a way that goes past just cold and dark. That kind of frightened takes time to go away. Grip held his gaze. I know what she's been through. He said it quietly, not defensively, not like a man explaining himself, like a man carrying information that was very heavy and very specific and not something he was going to put down in a garage in front of strangers. Okay, Ethan nodded. Then you know more than I do. More than I want to. Grip picked up the coat and held it back toward Ethan. This belongs to you. Ethan looked at it. She can keep it a while longer if she needs it. Grip went still. She was cold, Ethan said simply. It's still January. The man who ran with the Hells Angels and went by the name Grip and had walked into a garage surrounded by 40 riders who would move on. His words stood there holding a dead man's coat and looked at Ethan Cole with an expression that had moved entirely outside the range of anything Ethan had expected to see on that face today. You, Grip said slowly, are not what I thought I was coming here to find. Outside, an engine turned over one of the bikes, then another. The subtle shift and rumble of 40 machines coming back to life, riders mounting up the machinery of departure beginning. But Grip didn't move toward the door. He stood in the middle of the garage floor, and he looked at Ethan Cole with the focused attention of a man who had just recalculated something important. Not suspicion, not gratitude yet, that would take time, and men like Grip did not give gratitude quickly or easily, because gratitude meant debt, and debt meant acknowledgement, and acknowledgement meant something had gotten through the armor. Something had gotten through. You said she was in the alley on 2nd Avenue, Grip said, between the pawn shop and the dumpster. Yeah, that's 4 blocks from where we were looking. His jaw tightened. We were looking in every direction except that one. Ethan said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. She was running, Grip said, not explaining exactly, more like thinking out loud, giving Ethan the edges of a shape he wasn't going to fill in completely. There are people who had claims on her. Not legitimate claims. The kind of claims that men make when they think a debt converts into ownership. His voice went very flat on that last word. Very deliberate. She figured out what was happening, and she ran. She did right to run. She just ran in January. She said someone would kill her. They might have tried. Grip said it without drama, without emphasis, like he was describing weather. They won't try again. The way he said it was not a threat. It was a statement of fact from a man who had the particular resources to make facts of that nature. Ethan picked up the coat from where Grip had laid it down. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the familiar worn patches on the elbows, the frayed edge of the left cuff that he'd been meaning to mend for 2 years. His father had worn this coat through blizzards and funerals in the long, bad winter of 1997, when the farm equipment broke down and the money ran out, and Raymond Cole had kept working. Anyway, kept going anyway, because what else did you do? He folded it once and set it back on the tool chest. Give it back to her when she's ready, he said. She knows where I work if she wants to return it someday. Grip looked at the coat. He looked at Ethan. The fluorescent light buzzed its small electric buzz. You're going to let me walk out of here, Grip said quietly, without asking a single question about what I'm going to do next. You told me she's okay, Ethan said. That was the only question I had. Outside, the engines were running. The sound filled the cold afternoon air with a low thrum that Ethan could feel in the floor beneath his feet. Dev had found something very interesting to look at in the corner. Marcus had retreated to his office with the specific diplomacy of a man who understood that some conversations happen between specific people. Ron was still there. Old Ron, who hadn't been surprised in 19 years, stood near the lift, with his arms folded and his glasses in his pocket, and watched William Grip Reynolds with the careful attention of someone who had lived long enough to recognize a significant moment when it was happening in front of him. Grip looked at Ethan one more time, Then he turned and walked back toward the door. He pushed it open. The cold rushed in. He paused in the doorway without turning around. "Cole," he said. "Yeah. You work here every day, 6 days a week." He stepped through. The door swung shut. Ethan stood in the middle of the garage with his father's folded coat on the tool chest beside him and listened to the sound of 40 motorcycles pulling out of the lot, the roar of them building and then slowly fading down the block, spreading out across the cold Billings afternoon until the last of it was gone, and the only sound was the fluorescent light and the heat coming up through the floor vents and Dev somewhere behind him letting out a breath he'd apparently been holding for several minutes. "What?" Dev said with some feeling, "just happened." Ethan picked up the coat. He ran his thumb over the frayed cuff. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. Ron put his glasses back on. He picked up the socket wrench he'd set down when the engines first started. He looked at Ethan over the frames. "That man didn't come here to thank you," Ron said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Ethan agreed. "He didn't." "What did he come here to do?" Ethan thought about Grip's face when he'd said the word daughter. The way the flatness had broken just for a second before he'd gotten it back under control. The way he'd held that coat like it was evidence of something he hadn't wanted to find out. "I think he came here to find out what kind of person I was," Ethan said. "And I think he's still deciding." He hung the coat on the hook by his toolbox. He picked up his work order. He went back to the Silverado. Outside, the parking lot was empty and quiet, and the cold was settling back in the way cold does when the disruption has passed, not leaving, never leaving. Just waiting, the way that Montana winter always waited for the next gap in the armor. Ron left at 5:30 without saying much, which was his way. He put on his coat, picked up his keys, paused at the door long enough to look back at Ethan, once the look of a man who had something to say and had decided against it, and then walked out. Dev swept up and left 15 minutes later, still quiet in the specific way of someone who had witnessed something they hadn't processed yet. Marcus locked his office at 6, told Ethan to close up, and didn't ask any of the questions that had clearly been sitting in him since 3:47 in the afternoon. Ethan closed up alone. He ran through the closing routine the way he always did, checking the lift, hydraulics, locking the tool cages, making sure the compressor was bled down, and he did all of it on muscle memory because his head was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere in the cold in a narrow alley off 2nd Avenue, watching a girl with frozen hair and desperate eyes look at him like he was the first person in a long time who had done something without wanting anything back. He drove home in the truck with the bad alternator and the heater that worked at 60%. He made eggs. He watched 20 minutes of something on his phone without retaining any of it. He went to bed. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark and listened to the radiator knock and thought about the way Grip had said, "She's okay," with that particular weight under it, the weight of a near miss, the weight of a word that had almost not been true. He thought about the 40 motorcycles in the parking lot and the way the riders had stood without being told where to stand, covering the exits and the flanks, without making a production of it, just quietly occupying space the way men do when holding ground is something they've practiced. He thought about what Grip had said about claims that convert into ownership, the way he'd flattened his voice on that sentence, the deliberate compression of something that was clearly burning underneath. He thought about what "they won't try again" meant coming from a man like that. Around midnight, he stopped trying to sleep and stared at the ceiling instead. He didn't know what was coming. That was the honest truth of it. Grip had walked out of the garage with more information than he'd walked in with, and whatever that information was being used for right now, Ethan wasn't part of the calculation. He was a variable that had been identified and assessed and temporarily set aside. The feeling was strange, not threatening, not exactly, but not comfortable either. Like standing in a room and knowing someone is deciding something about you in a language you don't speak. He fell asleep somewhere after 1 and woke up at 6:15 to his alarm, in the radiator, in the ordinary Thursday morning feeling of a man who had to be at work in an hour. He checked his phone. No messages from numbers he didn't recognize. No news notifications that felt relevant. He made coffee, drank it standing over the sink, and told himself that whatever came next would come when it came, and there was no percentage in getting ahead of it. He was at the garage by 7:30. Marcus was already in. The shop smelled like coffee and brake fluid and the specific brand of cold air that comes in through a space heater working too hard. Dev came in at 8, Ron at 8:15. Nobody mentioned yesterday. The work orders were the same as any Friday's work orders, and the morning moved the way mornings move, when you let them, one job at a time, 1 hour at a time, the small, repeated rhythms of a life that knew how to keep going. It was 11:20 when the door opened. Ethan was at the counter writing up an estimate. He heard the door and registered it as a customer and kept writing. Then he heard the footsteps, not the sound of someone uncertain, not the hesitant approach of a person who wasn't sure they were in the right place, and something in the rhythm of them made him look up. Harper Reynolds stood inside the door of Kellerman's Auto and Repair. She was wearing his father's coat. She looked different in daylight, not better or worse different. The wild darkness in her eyes was still there, but it was sitting differently now. Less like an animal at the end of a rope, and more like someone who had slept and eaten and remembered what it felt like to be warm. Her hair was dry. She had color in her face that hadn't been there in the alley. She was still too thin, still carrying the particular posture of someone who had been braced against the world for too long, but she was standing. She was standing on her own, and she had walked through a door, and that was not nothing. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I wasn't sure you'd be here." "I'm always here," he said. 6 days a week. She nodded like that confirmed something. I wanted to see where you worked." "Now you know." She looked around the shop briefly. Dev was watching from the corner with transparent curiosity. She ignored him. "My dad came here yesterday," she said. "He did. What did he say to you?" Ethan put down the pen. "He said your name. He said you were his daughter. He asked me what happened in the alley." He paused. "He said you're okay." Something moved across her face. "He wasn't angry at you. Not by the end." She exhaled a long, slow breath like she'd been holding it since yesterday. "He was so sure you were—" She stopped herself. "He thought the people looking for me had sent you, that you were bait or a setup or something. He thought you were part of it." "I figured," Ethan said. The 40 motorcycle suggested something. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, she wasn't there yet, but the ghost of one. "He doesn't do small." "No," Ethan agreed. "I got that impression." She reached into the right pocket of the coat, the patch pocket, the one that had held Ethan's hands through 6 Montana winters, and pulled out a folded envelope. She set it on the counter between them. Ethan looked at it. "What is that?" "From my dad, Harper." "I didn't open it," she said. "He told me to bring it to you. That's all I know." She pulled the coat tighter around herself, a reflexive movement. "He said to say it was from the club." Ethan picked up the envelope. He turned it over once. It was sealed, plain white, his name written on the front in block letters with a black marker. He set it back on the counter. "Sit down," he said. "You want coffee?" She blinked like the question surprised her. "You're not going to open it." "In a minute. You want coffee or not?" She sat. She said yes to coffee. He poured 2 cups from the machine in the break room. Black brought them back and sat across from her on the other stool. She wrapped both hands around the cup. He watched her drink. "How are you actually doing?" he said. She looked at the cup. "I've been better." "I know, I mean right now, today." Today is, she thought about it. Today I'm okay. Today I'm warm and I'm not scared every time a door opens, so today is good. She looked up. 3 days ago, I wasn't sure I was going to make it to today. "What happened?" He said it carefully, not pushing, leaving her a door she could close if she needed. She didn't close it. "There's a man named Carver," she said. "He runs a finance operation. That's what they call it, a finance operation." The way she said it made the words sound like something she'd had to learn against her will. "He makes loans to people who are desperate, not big loans, just enough to keep someone from losing their house or their car or their business. And then he restructures them. Every time someone can't pay, he adds fees and restructures, and eventually the number is so big that the person can't even think straight about it, and by then Carver owns them. Not the debt, them." She paused. "My dad, there's history there. My dad tried to get Carver to release some people from his network 2 years ago. It didn't go well. Carver decided the way to keep my dad in line was through me." She said it plainly, without drama, without self-pity, with the flat tone of someone who had turned this information over so many times it had worn smooth. "He had people watching me," she said. When I figured it out, I ran. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have my phone. I had the clothes I was wearing and $40, and I got turned around in the cold and the $40 ran out. And then I was just, she looked at the coat, in an alley. Why didn't you call your father? Because the people watching me had my phone. Because my father's line might be monitored. Because I was 16 blocks from the nearest place I trusted, and I was so cold I couldn't think anymore. She met his eyes. Because I was scared that if I made the wrong move, they'd use me as leverage, and my dad would do something that got people killed. A pause. He would do that for me, and I didn't want to be the reason. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You were protecting him, he said. I was trying to, she looked down. Mostly I was just surviving. The shop noise continued around them, an air gun rattling somewhere, a radio playing low. Ordinary sounds. The envelope sat on the counter between their cups. Ethan picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. There was a phone number at the top, and below it, 4 sentences written in the same block lettering as his name on the envelope. You gave something that cost you. That creates a debt. We don't leave debts unpaid. Call the number when you're ready to talk. And at the bottom, a single initial. G. Ethan read it twice. He folded it back up and set it on the counter. He picked up his coffee. He wrote it himself, Harper said. She'd watched his face while he read. He doesn't usually write things down. What does it mean, Ethan asked. A debt. What does that mean to him exactly? It means exactly what it says. She held his gaze. My dad lives by a code. It's not complicated and it's not negotiable. If someone does something that costs them something real, not a favor, not a transaction, something that actually costs them, then the club owes them. Period. No exceptions. She paused. You gave up your coat in -22 weather, and you gave me your last $20, and you walked 6 blocks without it. That cost you something real. I was fine. You had a fever for 3 days. He stared at her. He found out, she said simply. He asked around. He does that. The corner of her mouth moved again, that almost smile. He's thorough. Ethan looked at the piece of paper on the counter. He thought about the 4 sentences and what they implied about the kind of organization that ran on codes and debts and the particular currency of something that cost you. He thought about 40 motorcycles turning into a parking lot and 40 men dismounting without being told where to stand, and what it meant that a man who commanded that kind of movement had taken the time to write 4 sentences in block letters on a piece of paper and send his daughter to deliver them. He didn't have to do this, Ethan said. No, Harper said. He wanted to. There's a difference, a big no. I know. She looked at him. That's why I brought it. He folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket. He finished his coffee. Across the shop, Deb had given up pretending not to listen and was now watching openly, which Ethan filed under things to address later. What are you going to do? Harper asked. I don't know yet. He looked at her. What happened to the people who were looking for you, Carver's people? She looked down at the car. They're not looking anymore. Your father. My father. She said it without elaboration, but her jaw was tight. He found me at Lou's that night. Someone in the club had eyes on the diner just as a matter of routine. He got there 2 hours after I did. And then she stopped. He dealt with it. Are you safe now? I'm safer. She thought about that qualifier. It's not finished. Carver is still out there. His network is still running. What my dad did was tactical. He closed the immediate threat. But Carver has lawyers, and he has money, and he knows how to operate behind things that look legitimate. So it's... She shook her head. It's not finished. Ethan filed that away. You should call him, Harper said. My dad. You should call the number. Why? Because he wants to talk to you, and when he wants to talk to someone, it's usually better to let him. She looked up. And because I think he has information about you that you'd want to know. Ethan went very still. What kind of information? Harper held his gaze. The kind that explains why Carver's name might not be as unfamiliar to you as you think. The shop was loud and ordinary around them, the air gun, the radio, the sound of a car engine turning over on the lift. Ethan looked at the girl in his father's coat and felt the floor shift slightly under everything he thought he understood about the last 3 days. What does that mean? He said. Call him, she said. He'll explain it better than I can. She stood up, she set her coffee cup down, and she looked at him across the counter with those dark eyes that had stopped being wild and started being something else, deliberate maybe. Careful. The eyes of someone who had learned the hard way that information was its own kind of protection. "Thank you," she said, "for the alley, for the coat, for the $20. She paused, "for not asking questions in the moment when questions would have been the wrong thing." "You're okay," he said. "That's enough for me." She nodded once. She turned and walked to the door. She pushed it open. She stopped. "The coat," she said without turning. "My dad said to give it back. I told him I'd give it back when I was ready." "Take your time," Ethan said. She walked out. The door swung shut. Dev materialized at Ethan's elbow with the specific speed of someone who had been hovering for the last 20 minutes. "Okay," he said. "So that was Dev." "Yeah. Go sweep something." Dev went and swept something. Ethan pulled the piece of paper out of his shirt pocket. He unfolded it and looked at the phone number. He looked at the 4 sentences. He thought about Harper's face when she'd said, "Carver's name might not be as unfamiliar to you as you think." The way she'd held his gaze while she said it, making sure it landed, making sure he understood it was not a casual thing to say. He put the paper back in his pocket. He went back to the estimate he'd been writing when Harper walked in. He finished it. He gave it to the customer who came in at noon to pick up her Subaru. He ate lunch at his toolbox, a sandwich, a bag of chips, a bottle of water, and he thought about the name Carver, the way you think about a word you've heard before but can't place turning it over, checking it against memories that didn't quite line up. And then at 1:17 in the afternoon, something clicked. Not a full memory, not a clear picture. More like the edge of one, the corner of a shape that had been in his peripheral vision for a long time without him ever turning to look at it directly. A name on a letter, a name on a loan document, a name that his mother had mentioned once, maybe twice in the last year, before the house went, before the savings went, before everything Raymond Cole had built over 43 years of working went somewhere that was not back to the people it came from. Ethan put down the wrench he was holding. He stood in the middle of the shop floor. His father had died 6 years ago. The farm had gone 18 months after that to a creditor whose name was on a restructured agreement that Ethan's mother had signed in grief and exhaustion without fully understanding what she was signing. The creditor's name on that agreement was not Carver. It was a company name, something like Apex Financial Partners or Pinnacle something. He couldn't remember exactly. He'd been 23 and devastated and furious and completely out of options, and he'd read the document 4 times and understood it enough to know that his mother didn't have a choice, and that had been the end of it. But there had been a name on the original loan, the one his father had taken out when the farm equipment broke down in 1997, the winter of the coat, the long bad winter. He'd refinanced it twice. The 3rd time the company had changed hands. And the name of the individual who'd signed off on the final restructured agreement, the one that had eventually devoured everything, Ethan pulled out his phone. He went through his contacts until he found his mother in Great Falls. He called her. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Ethan, Mom, I have to ask you something. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, I need you to think back. The loan on the farm, the last one when it was restructured. Before the company name, there was an individual name on the paperwork. Do you remember it? Silence on the line. The particular silence of someone going back to a place they don't like visiting." "Honey, that was 6 years ago." "I know. Do you remember the name?" Another pause. He heard her breathing. He heard the sound of the television in her apartment in Great Falls, the one she watched in the afternoons, the daytime shows that kept the silence at bay. "Carver," she said. "I think it was Carver, or something like it. There was a man who came to the house once before your father passed, and he sat at the kitchen table, and he was very polite, very smooth. Your father came and told me afterward that this was the man who owned the debt." Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. "Did he threaten Dad?" "He was too smart to threaten," she said quietly. "He just explained things. He was very good at explaining things in a way that made you understand exactly what was possible and what wasn't without ever saying anything that you could write down and take somewhere." She paused. "Your father never talked about it after. You know how he was?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "I know how he was." "Why are you asking about this now?" He looked at the piece of paper in his other hand, the phone number, the 4 sentences, the single initial at the bottom. Something came up, he said. It's okay, I'll explain later. He hung up. He stood in the shop and let that settle. The man who had restructured his father's debt until it swallowed the farm and everything on it, the man whose methods had put Raymond Cole under a pressure that Ethan would always believe had shortened. Whatever time his father had left, that man was named Carver. The same man who had used Harper Reynolds as leverage against her father. The same man who ran a network that turned desperate people's debts into ownership. The same man that Grip Reynolds had apparently been running against for 2 years. Ethan put the phone in his pocket. He put the paper in his pocket. He went back to the car on the lift and picked up the wrench, and he stood there for a long moment with his hand on the engine block, feeling the cold metal under his palm, breathing slowly. Then he went to the break room, poured himself a coffee he didn't drink, and sat alone at the folding table for 3 minutes. Then he took out the paper. He dialed the number. It rang twice. Cole, said Grip's voice. Flat, certain, like he'd known exactly who was calling. You knew about Carver, Ethan said. Before you came to the garage. You already knew. A pause. Not surprised. Grip wasn't surprised. Something more like acknowledgement. I found out after, when I was running your name. A beat. Your father's farm, the 1997 loan. The triple restructure. Yeah. I didn't know when I walked in, Grip said. I want to be straight with you about that. I found it after. Okay. And then Harper told me you'd heard the name from her and you hadn't reacted. Another pause. That told me something. What did it tell you? That you either didn't know or that you had the kind of control most men don't have. A brief flat pause that might have been as close to dry humor as Grip's voice got. I thought the first one was more likely. It was the first one, Ethan said. I know. Grip let a moment pass. Are you ready to talk about what comes next? Ethan looked at the break room wall, plain white, a coffee stain near the outlet, a calendar from last year that nobody had taken down. He thought about his father in 1997 keeping the farm going wearing the coat. He thought about a man sitting at his kitchen table, explaining things in a way that left no room to write anything down. Yeah, he said, I'm ready. Not on the phone, Grip said. Tonight, there's a place called the Iron Rail off Highway 3, 9 o'clock. A pause. Come alone, you won't be in any danger. I give you my word on that. Is your word something I should trust? The flatness in Grip's voice shifted by exactly 1 degree, just enough to hear the steel underneath. I've broken a lot of things in my life, he said. Not that. 9 o'clock, Ethan said. 9 o'clock. The line went dead. Ethan sat in the break room for another minute. He thought about his father's coat and the girl in the alley and the 40 riders who'd filled a parking lot without being asked, and the man who'd walked in with a piece of canvas and wool lining and walked out carrying something that was starting to look a lot like a plan. He went back to work. There were 3 more cars on the schedule for the afternoon, and the day wasn't going to finish itself, and whatever happened at 9 o'clock on Highway 3 was still 6 hours away. He picked up his wrench. He kept going. The Iron Rail was the kind of place that didn't advertise. No sign on the highway, just a number on a post and a gravel turnoff that you had to know to look for. Ethan found it at 8:53, parked his truck next to 3 other vehicles he didn't recognize, and sat for a moment with the engine running and the heater on and his hands on the wheel. He thought about calling someone. Ron, maybe not to explain, just so someone knew where he was. He decided against it. If Grip had wanted to hurt him, he'd had 40 opportunities in a well-lit parking lot in broad daylight, and he hadn't taken any of them. That wasn't a guarantee of anything, but it was a data point. He got out of the truck. Inside, the place was warm and smelled like old wood and beer, and the specific, comfortable heaviness of a room that had held a lot of conversations over a lot of years. 6 tables, a bar along one wall, 2 men at the far end of the bar who glanced at Ethan when he came in and then looked back at their drinks with the deliberate incuriosity of people who had been told to be incurious. Behind the bar, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair dried a glass and did not look up at all. Grip was at the corner table, alone, which was not what Ethan had expected. Across from him sat a man Ethan had never seen older than Grip, by 10 years at least, maybe more. Lean, white-haired, with the kind of stillness that comes from decades of knowing exactly how much space you take up and choosing carefully. He wore a vest identical to Grip's in structure, but different in its patches, and he had his hands folded on the table in front of him, with the relaxed authority of a man who had been the most important person in every room he'd entered for a very long time. Grip stood when Ethan approached. He didn't extend his hand, he nodded once the way men who've moved past the handshake stage acknowledge each other. "You found it," he said. "GPS has its limits out here," Ethan said. "Counted 3 wrong turns." "Everyone does." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down. This is Sullivan Hayes. He's the president." Ethan sat. He looked at Sullivan Hayes. Hayes looked back with the patient attention of a man conducting an assessment that had been ongoing since before Ethan walked through the door. "You know who we are," Hayes said. "Not a question." "Hell's Angels," Ethan said. "Yeah. You know what that means to most people." "I have a general idea." "And you came anyway." "You said I'd be safe," Ethan said. He looked at Grip. "You said your word wasn't something you broke." "It isn't," Grip said. Hayes unfolded his hands and picked up his glass. "Grip told me what you did," he said. 3 nights ago. The coat, the $20, the walk home." He took a drink, set the glass down. "He also told me you didn't ask for anything when he came to the garage. Didn't negotiate, didn't try to leverage the situation." "It wasn't a situation to me," Ethan said. "It was a girl in an alley." Hayes studied him. "That's a rare answer." "It's the true one." Hayes looked at Grip. Something passed between them, not words, just the economy of 2 men who had been reading each other for long enough that sentences were sometimes unnecessary. "All right," Hayes said. He set his glass down. "Tell him." Grip leaned forward and put his forearms on the table. He looked at Ethan with the direct, undecorated focus that was apparently just how he looked at everything. "Carver," he said. "Full name Daniel Carver. He runs a company called Meridian Capital Solutions, has for about 15 years. Before that, he operated under 4 other names, 4 other LLCs, each one dissolved right before a regulatory inquiry got too close." He paused. "You know the name because of your father's farm." "The 1997 loan," Ethan said. "The triple restructure. The loan that never should have been restructured at all, according to the original terms." Grip's jaw tightened slightly. "Your father had equity. He had collateral. He had a payment history that should have qualified him for renegotiation under standard terms. Carver restructured it anyway, added a penalty clause in the second cycle that compounded quarterly. By the time your father died, the debt was worth 3 times the original amount. It beat. Your mother signed the final settlement under duress 2 weeks after a funeral with no lawyer present." Ethan's hands were flat on the table. He kept them flat. "How do you know all of this?" "Because we've been building a file on Carver for 22 months, Hayes said. "Your father's farm is in it. 47 other cases are in it. Farm small businesses, a mechanic shop in Laurel, a diner in Roundup, a veterans group home in Billings that Carver dissolved and sold the property on in 2019. Hayes let that list sit for a moment. He specializes in people who don't have the resources to fight back and don't know the language well enough to understand what they're signing. "Why haven't you taken this to anyone?" Ethan said. "Law enforcement, state AG's office." "We tried," Grip said flatly. 18 months ago, a contact in the county DA's office. He was very interested, very sympathetic. 3 weeks later, Carver's attorney filed a preemptive defamation action against 2 of our members, and the DA's contact transferred to a different division." He paused. "Carver doesn't fight with fists. He fights with paperwork. He's got 3 attorneys on retainer who specialize in exactly this, making any organized opposition look like harassment and any evidence look like a grudge campaign." "So what are you doing about it?" Ethan said. Hayes and Grip exchanged another look. 2 weeks ago, Hayes said, "We found a woman named Diane Pratt. She worked for Meridian Capital for 6 years as a loan processor. She left 18 months ago after she was asked to falsify a payment history on a file and refused. She kept copies." He leaned forward. "Not just her file, multiple files. She didn't know what to do with them, and she was afraid, legitimately afraid, of what Carver would do if she went public alone. She's willing to talk now. She's been willing. She needs cover. She needs legal representation she can trust, and she needs someone outside our structure to validate what she has, because anything we bring forward, Carver's attorneys will frame as a criminal organization with a grudge." Hayes's voice was steady, measured. "We need a civilian, someone with a direct, documentable stake in Carver's conduct, someone whose connection to the situation is unambiguous and personal and completely unrelated to us. The room was very quiet. Ethan looked at Grip. My father's farm. Your father's farm, Grip said. Your mother's signature on a settlement that was obtained under documented duress. Your personal financial records, which, and I'm telling you this now, so you hear it from me, show that you have been carrying $140,000 in debt for the last 4 years that traces back to a secondary loan Carver's LLC issued against the farm equity the year before your father died. A loan your father may not have fully understood he was taking. Ethan heard that. He heard all of it. He sat very still. Say that again, he said. The debt you've been paying for 4 years, Grip said. $1,400 a month, automatic withdrawal. Apex Financial Partners. That's a Carver shell company. The loan was originated under your father's signature, but structured in a way that transferred liability to the estate and then to you as the surviving male heir through a clause in the settlement your mother signed. He held Ethan's gaze. You've been paying Carver's company for 4 years. You just didn't know his name was on it. Ethan didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, $140,000. At the current balance, yes. My father didn't. He never mentioned a secondary loan. He may not have fully understood what he was signing, Grip said. That's consistent with Carver's method. The documents are layered. He buries the key terms in addenda. A pause. Our file has the original paperwork. We got it through Diane Pratt. So she has my family's documents. She has everything, Hayes said quietly. 6 years of everything. Ethan looked down at the table. He thought about $1,400 a month for 4 years. He thought about the overtime hours and the skipped meals and the truck with the bad alternator he couldn't afford to fix and the apartment with the broken radiator where he'd lived for 3 years because the $900 a month was manageable, as long as the $1,400 a month didn't hit anything unexpected. He thought about all the math he'd done in the dark, moving numbers around to make them come out even, and how they never quite did, and how he'd always just assumed that was his life, that this was what financial survival looked like, grinding and narrow and never getting ahead. He looked up. What do you need from me? He said. Hayes put both hands flat on the table. We need you to meet with Diane Pratt. We need you to look at the documents and confirm what you can confirm about your family's history with Carver. And we need you to be willing to put your name on a formal complaint, not to the county DA, not to anyone Carver can reach, to the State Banking Commission and the Federal Consumer Protection Bureau, simultaneously with a simultaneous press contact, so that Carver can't neutralize one channel before the story is already running. A press contact, Ethan said. A journalist, Hayes said. Independent, not local. She's based in Helena, but she publishes nationally. She's been working on Carver's network for 8 months. She needs a named source, someone with documentation and a personal stake. He paused. She's good. She protects her people. Ethan turned to Grip. Why are you doing this? He said, not accusingly, genuinely. You could use any of the 47 people in your file. Why me? Grip was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had a different quality. Not softer, not warmer, but more unguarded than anything Ethan had heard from him yet. Because 3 nights ago, you walked into a dark alley and you gave my daughter everything you had and you didn't ask for anything back. And because the man who has been taking from you for 4 years is the same man who put her in that alley. He met Ethan's eyes. And because when I found out who you were, I thought this is the kind of person who deserves to know what's been happening to him. The quiet in the room had changed. It had gone from the quiet of assessment to something else, the quiet of a thing that had been decided or was very close to being decided, and everyone in the room knew it. I need to think, Ethan said. That's fair, Hayes said immediately. Take until tomorrow morning. We're not moving before the weekend. He slid a card across the table, plain white, just a number. Call that when you've decided. Ethan picked up the card. He looked at it. He put it in his pocket next to the folded paper with Grip's number, the piece of paper Harper had brought to the garage, the one with the 4 sentences about debt and cost. He started to stand, then he stopped. Carver, he said. The people who had Harper, what happened to them? Grip looked at him steadily. They're not a problem anymore. That's not an answer. It's the answer I can give you here. A pause, 1 degree of shift in the voice, the steel just audible underneath. They're not a problem. Harper is safe. The people directly involved in using her as leverage have been redirected. That's the most accurate word I can offer. Ethan thought about that word. Redirected. And Carver himself. Carver's careful, Hayes said. He keeps enough distance from the operational side that none of what Grip just described can be tied to him directly. His people act, he profits, and his lawyers make sure the distance is maintained. He folded his hands, which is exactly why we need the paper trail. The documents are the only thing that closes the distance. He knows you're building a case, Ethan said. He suspects, Grip said. He doesn't know how far along we are. He doesn't know about Diane Pratt. His voice went very flat. He does know that his play with Harper failed, which means he knows I'm motivated. And men like Carver, when they know someone motivated is coming for them, they start looking for exits. So there's a timeline, Ethan said. There's always a timeline, Hayes said. Ethan stood. He looked at Grip. She said it wasn't finished. Harper. She said it wasn't finished when I asked her if she was safe. She's right, Grip said. It's not finished. Is she worried? Grip looked at him for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read, not because it was blank, but because it was carrying too many things at once. Pride and guilt, and the particular exhausted love of a man who had spent his life being dangerous for the people around him, and was only now at this specific juncture wondering what that had cost his daughter. She's my kid, he said. She's been worried since she was old enough to understand what I do. A pause. But she's not running anymore. She came to your garage this morning on her own. She made that choice. He looked at the table. That's new. Ethan nodded. He turned toward the door. Cole. He stopped. You walk 6 blocks without a coat in -22 weather, Grip said. You got a fever and you missed 2 days of work and you never told anyone. He paused. You didn't do that because you thought it would pay off someday. You did it because it was there in front of you. Yeah, Ethan said. I've known a lot of men, Grip said. Most of them would have walked past. Most of them would have been smarter, Ethan said. Grip looked at him. That almost expression again, the one that lived just under the flat surface, the one that Harper's almost smile was probably inherited from. Maybe, he said, maybe not. Ethan drove home on the highway with the heater running and the dark pressing in on both sides, and his mind working through everything the way an engine works, through a cold start, slowly at first. Reluctantly, then with gathering momentum as the parts warmed up. $140,000. 4 years, $1,400 a month automatic withdrawal. He did the math in his head, and it came out to $67,200 already paid. To a man whose name he hadn't even known until today. To a shell company attached to the same operation that had eaten his mother's signature at a kitchen table 2 weeks after a funeral. He pulled into his parking lot and sat in the truck for a moment. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. It's me, Harper said. He recognized her voice immediately. How'd you get this number? My dad has everything. A pause. I wanted to make sure you were okay. After the meeting. I'm okay. He leaned his head back against the seat. You knew about my father's debt. Silence on the line. Then I found out 2 days ago when my dad ran your name. A beat. I wanted to tell you myself at the garage, but I didn't know how. So you told me to call him instead. Yeah. Quietly. I'm sorry, I should have just said it. It's okay, he said. And it was actually. He understood the geometry of it. She'd known it was going to land hard, and she'd wanted him to hear it from her father, from someone with the full file in front of him, rather than from her with half the picture. That was not a thoughtless decision. That was a careful one. Are you going to help them? She asked. He looked through the windshield at the parking lot, his apartment building, the light on in the second-floor window of the woman above him who worked nights and slept days and whom he'd spoken to exactly 4 times in 3 years. Yeah, he said, I think I am. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it that hadn't been there in the alley or in the garage, something that sounded like the beginning of relief. My dad's going to say it's because of the debt, she said, because it's personal now, because you have skin in the game. He'd be right, Ethan said. It's personal. But that's not the only reason. No, he said. It's not the only reason. Another silence. A good one, the kind that doesn't need filling. The coat, Harper said finally. It's the warmest thing I've ever worn. Ethan looked at the dashboard. He thought about his father in 1997, working through the winter wearing that coat, keeping going. Because what else did you do? He thought about the coat hanging in a cold alley, buttoned around a girl who had needed it more than he did. He thought about the weight of an object that carries more than its own history, that carries the history of everyone who's ever put it on. My dad wore it in bad winters, he said. He said it never let him down. It didn't let me down either, she said. He got out of the truck. He went inside. He lay down on his bed with his clothes on and stared at the ceiling and thought about all of it, the alley, the coat, the 40 motorcycles, the meeting in the iron rail, the name Daniel Carver, the number 1400, the word redirected. The look on Grip's face when he talked about Harper making a choice on her own, and somewhere in the middle of all that thinking, without meaning to, he slept. He dreamed about the farm, about the equipment barn and the smell of diesel and cut grass, about his father's hands on the steering wheel of the old John Deere, about a winter morning when he'd been maybe 10 years old, and Raymond Cole had lifted him up onto the tractor seat and let him steer across the frozen field, while the coat hung on the barn post inside waiting for them to come back in. He woke up at 5:40 with the alarm and the radiator and the ordinary morning feeling of a man who had made a decision in his sleep without quite meaning to. He made coffee. He drank it standing at the sink. He took out Hayes's card. He looked at the number. He looked at the clock on the microwave, 5:47 hours before Hayes had expected to hear from him, which was fine. He didn't need until morning. He'd known since the parking lot, maybe since the moment Grip had said the words, 4 years, an automatic withdrawal, and your mother's signature. He dialed. Hayes answered on the second ring, alert, unsurprised, as if he'd been up for hours. Cole. I'm in, Ethan said. Tell me when to meet Diane Pratt. A pause, then Hayes said, Saturday noon, I'll send you the address. Another pause, shorter this time, almost imperceptible. Good man. Ethan hung up. He put the card in his wallet next to the piece of paper with Grip's number and the piece of paper from the envelope Harper had brought to the garage, and the card he'd been carrying for 6 years that had his father's handwriting on it, just a phone number, now disconnected for a man who wasn't there to pick up. And he stood in his kitchen in the early dark of a Montana winter morning with all of those pieces of paper in his wallet and the coffee going cold on the counter. He got ready for work. He had cars to fix. He had a Saturday appointment with a woman named Diane Pratt, who had 6 years of documents in a box somewhere. And the specific kind of courage that comes from watching something wrong happen for long enough that doing nothing becomes its own unbearable weight. He picked up his keys. He thought about Harper in the alley, braced against the cold, saying, if someone finds me, they'll kill me, with the exhausted flatness of someone who had already accepted it. He thought about his father at the kitchen table with a smooth, polite man who was very good at explaining things in a way that left nothing you could write down. He thought about what it meant that those two things, those two separate stories years apart, involving people who'd never met each other, had somehow converged in a parking lot on a Thursday afternoon with 40 motorcycles and a dead man's coat. He went to work. Diane Pratt was not what Ethan had expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he had expected. Someone more guarded, maybe. Someone who looked like a person carrying 6 years of dangerous documents would look careful, compressed, constantly checking exits. Instead, she was a woman in her mid-40s who opened the door of a rented house in a quiet neighborhood and shook his hand with a firm, dry grip and said, come in, the coffee's fresh, like he was a neighbor stopping by on a Saturday afternoon. She had a box on the kitchen table, banker's box, standard size lid on. She put coasters out for their mugs. Grip was already there, which surprised Ethan. Hayes had said Saturday noon had not mentioned Grip specifically. Grip was sitting at the table with his hands wrapped around a mug, and he nodded when Ethan came in and said nothing, which Ethan was starting to understand was a form of greeting. There was a fourth person, a woman Ethan didn't know, late 30s, dark-haired, laptop open in front of her notebook beside it. She looked up when Ethan walked in and said, I'm Claire Vasquez, without standing up and with the precise economy of someone who was here for the work and didn't want to spend time on anything that wasn't the work. She's the journalist Hayes mentioned, Grip said. I gathered, Ethan said. He sat down. Diane sat across from him. She pulled the lid off the box. I've been doing this in my head for 18 months, she said, going over how to start, what to say first, whether this is the right thing. She looked at the box. I still don't know if it's the right thing, but I know it's the only thing I can live with, so that'll have to do. Ethan understood that logic completely. Start wherever makes sense, he said. She started 6 years back. She'd been hired by Meridian Capital Solutions as a loan processor standard work, originating and documenting personal and business loans, managing payment schedules corresponding with borrowers. She was good at it. She understood the paperwork, and she understood people, and she understood that the job was not glamorous, but it mattered because the paperwork had consequences for real people's lives. For the first 2 years, she'd believed Meridian was a legitimate operation with aggressive but legal practices. The third year was when she started seeing the pattern. There's a document in the origination package called a supplemental terms addendum, she said. She reached into the box and pulled out a folder, thick color-coded tabs. Standard loan packages don't have one. Meridian adds it to every file. It's on page 9 of the package, after the disclosure statements, after the interest rate tables, after everything a normal person is actually looking for. It's 3 pages of language that, if you're not a lawyer, and most of Carver's borrowers aren't lawyers, reads like standard boilerplate. She opened the folder. It isn't boilerplate. What does it do? Ethan said. It authorizes Meridian to restructure the loan terms unilaterally if the borrower misses more than one payment in any 18-month period. Not renegotiate, restructure, unilaterally, without the borrower's additional consent. She turned the folder toward him, and it contains a liability transfer clause that, under specific conditions, extends the debt obligation to the borrower's estate and to named family members who derive financial benefit from the collateral asset. Ethan looked at the page. He found the relevant paragraph. He read it twice. The language was dense and circular, the kind of prose that was precisely crafted to be technically readable and practically incomprehensible. Named family members who derive financial benefit, he said. If you lived on the farm, Diane said quietly, if you worked it, if you drew any income from it, or if the asset provided you with housing, that's the threshold. It's deliberately broad. Ethan looked at Grip. Grip looked back. My father had no idea, Ethan said. Almost certainly not, Diane said. In 6 years of processing, I never once saw a loan officer explain the addendum to a borrower. They were trained not to draw attention to it. When borrowers asked about page 9, they were told it was standard language. She paused. I asked about it myself in my second year, and my supervisor told me the same thing. Standard language. Don't worry about it. When did you figure out what it actually meant? Ethan said. When I was asked to process the liability transfer on a file, she said. A family farm in Cascade County. The original borrower had died. His widow was 3 weeks out from the funeral, and I was handed a transfer document and told to prepare it for the settlement meeting. She looked at her hands. The transfer document had been prepared before he died, before by at least a month. Someone in the office had already drafted it. Her voice stayed even, but it was the evenness of effort. His widow signed it at the settlement meeting. I was in the room. She had no idea what she was signing. Claire Vasquez was typing steadily. She hadn't looked up, but she was tracking every word. I quit 8 weeks later, Diane said. I took the files that I had legitimate access to as part of my processing work. I didn't take anything I wasn't supposed to have. She looked at Ethan. Your father's file was in my processing queue in my final 6 months. I have the complete origination package, both restructuring documents and the liability transfer. Ethan put his hands flat on the table. The same gesture he'd used at the iron rail, keeping them flat, keeping them still. Can I see it? She reached into the box without hesitation and handed him a folder. He opened it. His father's name was on the first page, Raymond Cole, handwritten in the loan origination form, the handwriting familiar in a way that hit Ethan somewhere behind his sternum without warning. He'd seen that handwriting on birthday cards and Christmas checks, in a note tacked to the barn door in 1999 that said, gone to Billings back by 3, and that Ethan had kept for no rational reason, and that was currently in a shoebox in his closet. He turned to page 9, the supplemental terms addendum. He read it slowly, this time all 3 pages, with the specific focused attention of a man who was no longer reading bureaucratic language abstractly, but reading it as the architecture of something that had been done to his family while they weren't looking. When he got to the liability transfer clause, he stopped. He read it again. Derive financial benefit from the collateral asset. He'd lived on the farm until he was 22. He'd worked summers all through high school. He'd drawn wages from it, minimal wages, the wages of a kid helping his father, but documented wages because Raymond Cole was meticulous about documentation. Documented wages. He knew, Ethan said. His voice was very quiet. Carver. He knew when he wrote this that it would reach me. He documented my wages because my father told him about me, probably at the kitchen table meeting my dad talking about his son the way dads do, and Carver's office used it. They used my father talking about his kid to make sure the liability would transfer. Nobody spoke. Claire Vasquez had stopped typing. Grip said, yes. One word. The weight of it was sufficient. Ethan closed the folder. He set it on the table. He did not do anything that could not be undone, which was the thing he was most focused on in that moment. Not doing anything that could not be undone, because the thing in his chest right now was the kind of thing that if he let it out would not be something he could walk back from. He breathed. He looked at the table. Okay, he said. Okay, Diane said. Tell me what you need from me to make this work. He looked at Claire. All of it. Everything. What's the process? What's the timeline? What do I have to put my name on, and what are the risks? Claire Vasquez opened her notebook. The risks are real, she said. I'm not going to minimize them. Carver's attorneys will file against you as soon as the complaint goes public. It will be a harassment claim, a defamation claim, possibly a fraudulent documentation claim. All of it will be baseless, but it will take time and money to defend. I don't have money, Ethan said. The club has attorneys, Grip said. They'll represent you, pro bono. He said it without flourish, without making it a gift. Just information delivered flat the way he delivered everything. I don't want to owe. You don't, Grip said. We've already had this conversation. You gave something that cost you. The debt runs the other direction. He held Ethan's eyes. Let us close it. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. He thought about what it meant to accept something from people whose world operated on codes he didn't fully understand, whose methods included things described with the words like redirected. He thought about what it meant to refuse it. He thought about his mother in Great Falls, $900 a month in a small apartment, the television keeping the silence at bay. Okay, he said again. Claire nodded once and kept going. The complaint goes to the State Banking Commission and the Federal Consumer Protection Bureau simultaneously. I have a contact at the AP Associated Press who's been sitting on this story waiting for a named source with documentation. The moment the complaint is filed, the story runs. Both simultaneously, so Carver can't kill one before the other goes live. She paused. Once it's public, his attorneys lose most of their leverage. The harassment and defamation angles stop working when the story is already out and the documents are already in the hands of two federal agencies. How long until the complaint is filed? Ethan said. Monday, she said. If you sign today. Ethan looked at the folder on the table, his father's handwriting on the first page. I'll sign today. Diane exhaled the breath of someone who had been holding something for 18 months and was finally cautiously beginning to set it down. Claire was already pulling a document from the side pocket of her laptop bag. Grip said nothing. He picked up his coffee and drank it and watched Ethan with the specific attention of a man who was recalculating something in real time, adding information to a running assessment that had been going since Thursday afternoon in a garage on the south side of Billings. Ethan signed. 3 places the formal complaint, a release authorizing Claire to use his name and documentation in publication, and an affidavit attesting to his personal financial connection to Meridian Capital Solutions. He signed each one without stopping to think about it because the thinking was done. He'd done it in his sleep on Thursday night and in his truck on the highway and in the 647 quiet of a kitchen with cold coffee on the counter. He signed and it was done. Monday, Claire said. She gathered the documents with the efficient care of someone handling something valuable. I'll call you before it goes live. You'll have about an hour's notice. What should I do with that hour? Ethan said. Nothing, she said. Stay at work. Act like nothing's happened. The story will find you. Don't go looking for it. She closed her laptop. And if anyone contacts you for comment before I've given you clearance, say nothing. Nothing at all. No comment, literally nothing. Hang up. Got it. She left. She shook hands with Diane, nodded at Grip, and was out the door with the documents in her bag inside of 90 seconds, moving with the purposeful energy of someone who had a weekend of work ahead of them and was glad of it. Diane sat back. She looked tired and lighter simultaneously. I've been carrying those files in a storage unit for 18 months, she said. I moved them to my trunk 6 months ago because I was afraid someone had found the unit. I've been sleeping with my car keys next to my bed. She looked at Ethan. I don't know you, but I know your father's file. I know what was done to your family. And I want you to know that every person in that box, every file I have, there's a family behind it who went through what yours went through. That's why I kept the files, not to hurt anyone, just because someone had to. Ethan looked at the box. How many people? 47 complete files, she said. Probably more I didn't have access to. 47. Hayes had said 47 in the iron rail. The number meant something different now that he had seen his father's handwriting on page 1 of a folder. He stood. He thanked Diane. He shook her hand. He meant it. Outside, Grip fell into step beside him. They walked to their vehicles without urgency. You did right in there, Grip said. I signed in some papers, Ethan said. You signed some papers that are going to matter to 47 families, Grip said. Don't undersell it. Ethan stopped at his truck. He turned to Grip. The settlement, he said. When the complaint is filed, what happens to the debt, my $140,000? If the liability transfer is ruled invalid, which it will be, it doesn't withstand scrutiny under Montana estate law, the debt is nullified. Grip said it without hesitation, like he'd already worked through the legal mechanics, which he clearly had. Everything you've paid over 4 years is technically recoverable in a civil action against Meridian. The club's attorneys will file that action simultaneously with the complaint. Ethan processed that. $67,200 he'd paid, recoverable. That's not why I signed, he said. I know it isn't, Grip said. That's exactly why I told you. They stood beside their vehicles in the cold Saturday air. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Someone was running a snowblower 2 houses over the mechanical grind of it, cutting through the quiet. Harper asked me to give you something, Grip said. He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not an envelope this time, just paper folded twice. He held it out. Ethan took it. He unfolded it. It was a drawing, simple pencil on notebook paper, a coat recognizable in its shape, hanging on what appeared to be a hook on a wall. Under the coat in Harper's handwriting, still keeping it warm for you. He looked at it for a moment. He folded it back up. She draws, he said. Since she was 4, Grip said. Something moved through his voice, the involuntary softening of a man talking about his child in the specific way that bypasses the armor without his permission. Her mother was an artist. Harper got it from her. Ethan put the drawing in his shirt pocket. Your wife, he said. She died 9 years ago, Grip said. Flat but not closed. Just the factual weight of something that had been carried for a long time. Harper's been with me since, which means she's been around this life since she was 8 years old, and she's handled it better than most adults would, and she's also paid prices for it that I'm still working out how to account for. Carver using her as leverage, Ethan said. That was the price for my moving against him 2 years ago, Grip said. I knew there'd be a cost. I thought I'd protected her well enough. I was wrong. His jaw tightened. She spent 4 months with people who weren't what they presented themselves as, believing she'd found a way out of being my daughter for a while. A normal life, college applications and roommates and all of it. And Carver found her inside that and used it. A pause. She trusted people she shouldn't have trusted, and she did it because I'd given her a life where trust was something she had to ration. That's on me. Ethan listened. He didn't try to reframe it or soften it. He just let it be what it was. She's not rationing it now, Ethan said. She came to the garage. She called me Thursday night. That's not someone who's finished trusting. Grip looked at him. No, he said quietly. It's not. She's going to be okay, Ethan said. Yeah. Grip said it the same way he'd said it Thursday in the garage, with the weight of a word that had been in real danger of never being applicable and was only now settling into solid ground. Yeah, she is. They parted ways without ceremony. Grip mounted his bike. Ethan got in his truck. The snowblower 2 houses over continued its grinding work. The dog barked once more and stopped. Sunday passed the way Sundays pass when you're waiting for something slowly at the edges and too fast in the middle, the hours not quite adding up to what they should. Ethan fixed the alternator on his truck, which he'd been putting off for 2 months, and which turned out to be a 3-hour job that he stretched to 4, because having something to do with his hands was the only way he knew how to wait. He talked to his mother Sunday evening. He told her most of it, the documents, the complaint, what Meridian Capital Solutions actually was, and who was behind it. He left out Grip and the club, at least for now, not because he was ashamed of the connection, but because there was a sequence to how information landed best, and "I got mixed up with the Hells Angels" was not an effective opener for anything else you needed someone to hear. His mother was quiet for a long time after he'd finished. "Your father knew something was wrong," she said finally. "He never said it that directly. But the last winter, the bad one, he'd come in from the equipment barn and he'd sit at the kitchen table and he'd just look at his hands for a while. Not reading, not doing anything, just looking." She paused. "I think he understood that he'd signed something he didn't fully understand, and he blamed himself for it. He was that kind of man." "I know," Ethan said. "He wasn't wrong to trust people," she said. "That's the thing that man Carver, he preys on the fact that decent people trust. That's not a character flaw. That's just being human." Ethan thought about 47 folders in a banker's box, 47 families, 47 kitchen tables with decent people looking at their hands. "Monday, something's going to happen," he said. "You'll probably see it in the news. Maybe the Great Falls papers, maybe bigger. It's going to have Dad's name in it." Silence. "Then is it going to be okay?" "Yeah, Mom," he said. "I think it's going to be okay." Monday morning arrived with the gray, purposeful light of a January day that meant business. Ethan was at the garage at 7:30. He changed oil and rotated tires and replaced a water pump on a Dodge Ram and talked to customers with the ordinary half-presence of a man who was listening to his phone with one part of his attention while doing everything else with the rest. At 11:14, his phone rang. Claire Vasquez. 20 minutes, she said. "The complaint was filed at 11 o'clock. Both agencies confirmed receipt. The AP piece goes live at 11:30. A pause. "You ready? "Yeah," he said. "Stay at work. Don't answer calls from numbers you don't know. I'll call you again when it's up." She paused. "Ethan, you did good." She hung up. He put the phone in his pocket. He picked up his wrench. He went back to the Dodge Ram. At 11:31, Dev looked up from his phone with an expression Ethan had never seen on his face before. Something between astonishment and the specific excitement of someone who has suddenly understood that the quiet man at the next workstation contains multitudes. "Dude," Dev said. "Not now, Dev." "There's an AP story," Dev said, "about a predatory lender in Billings, and you're Dev. Your name is in it." "I know." Dev stared at him. "You knew this was happening." "I said not now." Dev went very quiet in the way of someone exercising enormous and uncharacteristic self-control. Ethan's phone buzzed. Text from a number he didn't recognize. He ignored it. Buzzed again and again. He turned the volume off and kept working. At 12:45, Marcus came out of his office. He looked at Ethan with an expression that was hard to parse, somewhere between concerned and the particular unease of a man who had watched 40 motorcycles fill his parking lot on Thursday and was now reading about his employee in a wire service story. "You want to explain what's happening," Marcus said. "Not particularly," Ethan said, "but I will if you need me to." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Are you in trouble?" "Not the way you mean." "Is this shop in trouble?" "No," Ethan said. "None of this touches here." Marcus thought about that. He was a practical man, and the practical calculus was simple. Ethan showed up on time, did the work, didn't cause problems, and the story in the news was about a predatory lender, not about anything Kellerman's had done. He nodded once and went back to his office. At 2:15, Grip called. "It's moving," he said. "Carver's attorneys filed a response 20 minutes ago. Defamation claim exactly like Claire said." His voice was even. "Our attorneys filed the civil action at 2 o'clock, simultaneously." A pause. "His response is fast, too fast for something drafted this morning. He had it ready." "He knew it was coming," Ethan said. "He suspected. He didn't know the timeline." A beat. "The fast response means he's scared. Scared men make fast decisions. Fast decisions make mistakes." Grip let that sit. Claire's AP contact is already following up on the defamation claim. It becomes part of the story. Billionaire lender tries to silence working-class mechanic with defamation suit. That's a better story than the original one. Ethan leaned against the wall of the break room. Is Harper okay? Harper, DeGrip said, and there was something in the way he said her name, a kind of surprised gentleness, like he hadn't expected the question and wasn't sure how to hold it, is at the club's safe house watching all of this on her laptop and apparently drawing. A pause. She said to tell you she's fine. She also said to tell you that your truck has a bad alternator. Ethan almost laughed. Fixed it yesterday. She'll be glad to hear it. He went back to work. He finished the Dodge Ram. He did 2 more jobs. He answered the phone when Claire called at 4 to tell him the AP story had been picked up by 7 regional outlets and 1 national cable news network, and that the Banking Commission had confirmed it was opening a formal inquiry, and that the Federal Bureau had issued a statement saying it was reviewing the complaint. He answered the phone when his mother called at 4:30 to say she'd seen it, and she was sitting at her kitchen table and she was crying not from sadness, but from something else, something she didn't have a word for, and that his father would have been proud. He didn't answer the 3 calls from numbers he didn't know. He closed up at 6. He sat in his truck in the empty parking lot and let the quiet come down around him. The same parking lot where 40 motorcycles had stood on Thursday afternoon. Empty now, just his truck in the glow of the security light, in the cold January dark pressing in from all sides. His phone buzzed one more time. Harper, the news said, Billings mechanic. That's you, you're famous. He looked at the message. He typed back, that's a low bar for famous. 3 seconds. Still counts. How are you? He thought about that, about the alternator and the documents, and his father's handwriting, and his mother's voice saying he would have been proud. About 47 folders in a box, about the word redirected and the word recovered and the word okay, and all the different weights those words could carry depending on what they were measuring. He typed, ask me again in a week. Her response came immediately. Deal. The code says hi. He put the phone in his pocket. He started the truck. The engine turned over clean and strong, the alternator doing its job the way it was supposed to, the way things worked when the right parts were finally in the right places. He pulled out of the lot. He drove home through the Billings winter dark, and for the first time in 4 years, the number 1400 did not appear anywhere in his head. The week that followed moved differently than any week Ethan could remember. Not faster, not slower, differently. Like the air pressure had changed, and everything was operating under new conditions that his body hadn't fully calibrated to yet. Tuesday morning, a producer from a Helena television station called Kellerman's landline, asking for Ethan Cole. Marcus took the message and handed it to Ethan on a sticky note, with a look that said he was recalibrating his understanding of who worked for him. Ethan called Claire, first read her the number, and she told him not to call back. The story was already running on its own momentum, and every interview Ethan gave before the legal process solidified was a variable Carver's attorneys could use. Claire was managing the narrative with the precision of someone who had done this before and knew exactly which threads to pull and which to leave alone. Wednesday, 2 more outlets picked up the AP piece. A financial news site ran a sidebar on Meridian Capital Solutions' corporate structure, the shell companies, the LLC chains, the 4 prior operating names. Someone had done the work of tracing it all the way back, and seeing it laid out in print was different from hearing it described at a kitchen table. It looked like what it was, a machine. Deliberate patience, specifically engineered to be invisible until it had already finished what it came to do. Thursday, Carver's attorneys escalated the defamation claim. They filed a motion for emergency injunctive relief, asking a judge to order Claire's publication to retract the story pending litigation. The motion was denied by noon. Claire texted Ethan a single word, good. Grip called Thursday evening. Carver's moving money, he said. Our attorneys flagged it asset transfers to 3 LLCs that weren't in the original filing. He's trying to insulate himself before the Banking Commission gets to the discovery phase. Is that legal? Ethan said. Technically, for about another 72 hours. A pause. The Federal Bureau moved faster than expected. They don't usually act this quickly, but 47 documented files from an inside source tends to motivate people. Another pause. They froze 2 of the accounts this afternoon. Ethan sat with that. What does that mean for the people in those files? It means the restructured debts are in suspension. Nobody has to pay anything tied to those accounts while the freeze is in effect. Grip's voice had a quality Ethan hadn't heard in it before, not satisfaction, exactly more like the release of pressure that had been building for 22 months. 47 families got a call from their loan servicer today telling them their account was under federal review and all payments were suspended pending investigation. 47 families. 47 phones ringing with news that the thing pressing down on them had paused, had been named, had been seen by someone with the authority to stop it. Ethan put his hand over his face. He sat in his apartment with the radiator knocking and the phone against his ear, and he breathed through the feeling that came with that large and unruly, the kind of feeling that didn't have a clean name, that was made of too many things at once to be called by just one of them. "You all right?" Grip said. "Gracious." "Yeah," Ethan said. "Yeah, I'm all right." Friday at 4:15, Marcus called Ethan into his office and shut the door, which he had never done before in the 3 years Ethan had worked at Kellerman's. Ethan sat across from him at the desk that was buried under work orders and parts catalogs and a coffee mug that had not been washed this calendar year. "I got a call today," Marcus said, "from the building's owner." "Okay," Ethan said carefully. "Someone made an offer on this property." Marcus looked at him steadily. "Cash offer. Full asking price. The owners have been trying to sell this building for 2 years, and nobody's touched it because the neighborhood assessment is complicated and the lot has drainage issues." He paused. "The offer came through an LLC called Iron Rail Holdings." Ethan was very still. "You know that name?" Marcus said. "I know that name," Ethan said. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. He was a practical man, as previously established, and the practical calculus was now considerably more complicated than it had been on Monday. He picked up his coffee mug, looked into it, put it back down. "The LLC's representative contacted me after they contacted the owner. They want to keep the garage operating." He paused. "Under new management." "Who's the new management?" Ethan said, though something in his chest already knew. "That," Marcus said, "is what they want to discuss with you." He slid a business card across the desk. Plain white, a phone number, the name printed below it, Sullivan Hayes. Ethan looked at the card. He didn't pick it up. "Marcus," he said, "what are you going to do?" Marcus looked at him with the tired, honest expression of a man who was 61 years old and had been running someone else's garage for 19 years and had recently watched his most reliable employee turn out to be at the center of something that had made the AP wire. "I'm going to retire," he said. "I've been thinking about it for 2 years. My wife's been thinking about it longer." He paused. "The offer gives me the exit I didn't know how to take." He met Ethan's eyes. "The question is what you're going to do." Ethan picked up the card. He called Hayes from the parking lot, standing in the cold with his breath clouding in the last of the afternoon light. Hayes answered on the first ring. "The garage," Ethan said. "The garage," Hayes confirmed. "You can't just—" "We can," Hayes said. "We did. The sale closes in 10 days. A pause, the measured, unruffled patience of a man who had made a decision and was now explaining it, not defending it. "The deed transfers to Kellerman's Auto and Repair, LC, sole proprietor, Ethan Cole, upon closing." Ethan pressed his hand against his truck, the cold metal solid under his palm. "I can't run a business. I've never." "You've been running that shop," Hayes said. "Marcus will tell you the same thing if you ask him. He stopped running it 2 years ago. You've been doing the scheduling, the supplier relationships, the quality control. You just haven't had the title or the income that goes with it." Ethan thought about that, about the last 2 years of 6-day weeks and work orders and the supplier in Laurel he'd negotiated a better parts rate with because Marcus hadn't gotten around to it. About the 3 mechanics he'd effectively trained when they were hired because nobody else had time. About the things he'd done because they needed doing without thinking about what they were. "Ron," he said, "Dev, the others, they keep their jobs." "That's your call as owner," Hayes said. "But yes, that was the assumption." "And you get what out of this?" Ethan said. "We get a debt cleared," Hayes said simply. "That's how this works. You gave something, we give something back, the ledger closes." A pause. "And we get the knowledge that someone decent is running a garage in Billings, which is not as small a thing as it sounds." Ethan stood in the parking lot. The cold was doing its quiet, aggressive work against his jacket. He'd remembered a jacket tonight at least. He thought about his father building something over 43 years and having it taken apart by language on page 9 of a document he hadn't fully understood. He thought about what it meant to build something yourself with your name on it, with the title that matched the work. I need to think, he said. You said that at the iron rail, Hayes said. You called back in 6 hours. I might need 7 this time. The smallest pause. Take 8, Hayes said. The offer doesn't expire. He called his mother. He told her all of it, the garage, the deed transfer, Hayes and Grip, and iron rail holdings, and what it all meant. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and when he finished, there was a silence that he recognized from their Sunday call, the silence of someone going back to a specific place in their memory. Your father always wanted you to have something of your own, she said. He used to say, you remember, you've heard this. He used to say that the only thing that's really yours is the thing you built yourself. A pause. But he also said something else that you might not remember because you were young when he said it. He said the thing that makes it yours isn't that you built it alone. It's that you built it with people who showed up when it mattered. Ethan looked at the ceiling of his truck. Mom, I'm just telling you what he said. I know. He would take the garage, Ethan. I know he would. Will you? He exhaled, a long, slow breath that fogged the windshield slightly. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'm going to take the garage. She made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else. Good, she said. Now tell me when you're going to fix the heat in that apartment. He called Hayes back in 4 hours. Hayes said good in exactly the same tone as Ethan's mother, which was strange and right simultaneously. The following Saturday, 2 weeks to the day since Ethan had sat across from Diane Pratt and signed 3 documents on a kitchen table, Grip called in the morning and said, come to the clubhouse tonight, 7 o'clock. And before Ethan could ask what for, Grip had hung up. The clubhouse was not what movies had told Ethan to expect, which he noted with the specific satisfaction of someone who had learned to stop letting movies do his expecting for him. It was a large building, solidly constructed with a main room that held maybe 60 people when it was full, which tonight it was. He walked in with the particular sensation of being the only person in the room who didn't belong to something, and then he looked around and adjusted that he was the only person who didn't have a patch on his back. That was a different thing. He recognized faces. Men from the parking lot at Kellerman's, the ones who'd stood without being told where to stand. They looked different here. Not smaller, not less formidable, but more fully themselves. Louder, a laugh from the corner that filled the whole room. 2 men arguing good-naturedly about something near the bar. An older man with a white beard sitting alone with a glass of something amber, reading what appeared to be a paperback Western. Grip met him inside. He looked at Ethan once the full inventory look, then nodded. You came. You called, Ethan said. Not everyone does. I'm not most people. Grip almost smiled. The Reynolds family almost smile worn slightly differently on his face than on his daughter's. He walked Ethan to the far side of the room where Hayes was standing with 3 other men Ethan didn't know. Hayes shook his hand, introduced the others' names Ethan stored away carefully, understanding that in this room, names mattered. We don't do ceremonies, Hayes said. That's not what this is. You're not joining anything. You're not being asked to join anything. He looked at Ethan steadily. But we wanted you here in this room with these people so you could understand something directly. What's something, Ethan said. That what you did in that alley 2 weeks ago, it didn't just save Harper. It moved something. Hayes paused. We've been running against Carver for almost 2 years. We had the documents. We had Diane, we had the file. What we didn't have was the thread that tied it all together in a way that couldn't be dismissed or managed or legally neutralized. He looked around the room briefly, then back at Ethan. You were that thread, not because of what you signed, because of why you were in a position to sign it, because the same man who took your father's farm used your father's love for his son against him, and you walked into an alley one January night and gave a stranger your coat, and those 2 things turned out to be connected. He paused. You can't plan for that. You can't manufacture it. It just happened because of who you are. Ethan stood with that. He didn't try to deflect it or minimize it. He let it land. Then Harper was there. He hadn't seen her come in. She was wearing the coat, his father's coat, the heavy canvas and wool lining over jeans and a dark sweater, and she looked like herself in a way that she hadn't in the alley or the garage. Or even on the phone, she looked like someone who had come back from a place that had tried to keep her and had decided firmly and finally not to stay. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him with the dark eyes that had gone from wild to deliberate to something he was only now finding the word for: settled. She looked settled, not safe in the naive sense, not untouched, settled, like a person who had found their footing on ground that had recently shifted and was choosing consciously to stand on it. "You look better," he said. "You look the same," she said. "That's a compliment." "Is it?" "It means you don't look like any of this changed you into someone you weren't before." She tilted her head slightly. Some people, when things happen, big things, they come out different. Not better or worse, just different. Rearranged. She studied him. "You're not rearranged." "I got a garage out of it," he said. "You earned a garage out of it," she said. "Different thing." He looked at her. "Are you going to give the coat back?" She looked down at it. She ran her hand along the front panel over the patched pocket, the way you touch something you've been thinking about. "Do you want it back?" "My dad wore it for 23 years, Ethan said. "I wore it for 6. You've had it for 2 weeks. He paused. "At this rate, it's going to outlast all of us." Harper looked up. "He was a good man," she said. "Your dad. I know that from the way you talk about the coat. People don't carry things like that unless the person behind them was worth carrying." Ethan didn't speak for a moment. "He was," he said. She reached up and started unbuttoning the coat. He put his hand out, not stopping her, just present the way you hold space for someone doing something that costs a little. She slipped it off. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Then she handed it to him. "Thank you," she said, "for the alley, for not asking questions, for being the kind of person who takes his coat off in -22 weather for a stranger and then goes back to work the next morning like it's just a thing people do." She held his gaze. "It's not just a thing people do." "Some people do," he said. "Not enough," she said. He took the coat. He put it on. The wool lining settled against his shoulders with the familiar weight of something that had always belonged there. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like his father's hands on his shoulders. Not a ghost, not a memory, just the warmth of a coat that had been through bad winters and had never let anyone down. Grip appeared at Harper's shoulder. He looked at the coat on Ethan. He looked at his daughter. Something in his face did what it always did when he was carrying more than his voice was going to say, compressed, held present just below the surface. "The Banking Commission issued a formal finding this afternoon," he said. "Carver's operating licenses are suspended pending full investigation. Meridian Capital Solutions is frozen." He paused. His attorneys withdrew the defamation claim an hour ago. The room had gotten quieter around them, word moving person to person. The man with the white beard had put down his paperback. 2 of the men from the bar had turned around. "What happens to him?" Ethan said. "Federal investigation," Grip said. "Wire fraud, predatory lending, fraudulent documentation across state lines. Claire's attorney contact says the Federal Bureau is talking to prosecutors." He held Ethan's eyes. "He won't walk away from this." "And the 47 families. The civil actions are filed. The debt nullification process takes time, months probably, but the framework is there. Every one of those files is now evidence in a federal case, which means every one of those debts is under scrutiny." He paused. "Some of them will get everything back. Some will get partial recovery. None of them will pay another dollar to Carver." Ethan thought about his mother in Great Falls, about the signature at the kitchen table 2 weeks after a funeral, about the farm, the barn, the frozen field, the John Deere, his father's hands on the wheel. "What about the farm?" he said quietly. Grip was quiet for a beat. "The property was sold," he said. "We can't recover real estate that's been transferred in a legitimate subsequent sale. That's the honest answer." He paused. "But the money your mother received from the settlement, our attorneys are arguing that it was suppressed, that she was entitled to more under the actual equity position. If that argument holds, she sees the difference." He held Ethan's gaze. "It's not the farm. I'm not going to tell you it is." "I know," Ethan said. "It's what's possible," Grip said. "Sometimes that's the best you can do." "Sometimes that's enough," Ethan said. Grip looked at him for a long moment. The room moved around them, voices a burst of laughter from the corner music starting low somewhere. The particular aliveness of a room full of people who had been carrying something heavy and were now collectively beginning to set it down. "You're going to be all right, Cole," Grip said. It was not a question. It was not reassurance. It was the flat, certain delivery of a man who had assessed a situation with the same thoroughness he applied to everything, and had reached a conclusion. "Yeah," Ethan said, "I think I am." Harper looked between them. Then she said to her father, "He fixed his alternator." Grip looked at Ethan. "Told you I would," Ethan said. Something passed across Grip's face that was the closest thing to warmth that his particular architecture permitted. He put his hand out. Ethan shook it, not the first handshake, the one in the garage that had been assessment, but something else. Something that had been earned on both sides by people showing up in the specific ways that people who mean what they say show up. Hayes raised a glass across the room. He didn't make a speech. He just raised it, and around the room other glasses went up, and Ethan understood that this was the ceremony. Hayes had said they didn't do this quiet collective acknowledgement, this raising of glasses without words, because words would have been less than what the moment actually was. He drove home late, the coat on the heater doing its full job now, with the alternator running clean. He called his mother when he got back to the apartment. She was awake. She'd been waiting, which he'd known she would be. He told her about the room, about Hayes raising the glass, about Harper and the coat and what she'd said about his father. People don't carry things like that unless the person behind them was worth carrying. His mother was quiet for a long time after that. "Are you happy?" she said. He thought about that honestly, not reflexively, not with the automatic reassurance of a person who doesn't want someone to worry. He thought about it the way his father would have thought about it, squarely, without ornament, just looking at the thing directly. The garage was his. The debt that had been grinding against him for 4 years was gone. The man who had sat at his father's kitchen table and explained things in a way you couldn't write down was now the subject of a federal investigation, and 47 families were no longer making payments to someone who had never intended anything for them except loss. His mother's case was in the hands of attorneys who answered to people who kept their word. Harper Reynolds was standing in a room full of people who would move at her father's word, wearing a settled expression that had not been there 2 weeks ago in a dark alley off 2nd Avenue. And in the left patch pocket of his father's coat, folded twice, was a pencil drawing of that same coat hanging on a hook with the words, "Still keeping it warm for you," in handwriting he already recognized. "Yeah, Mom," he said, "I'm happy." She exhaled the long breath of a woman who had been waiting, not just tonight, but for years, in the particular way that parents wait for their children to land somewhere solid, somewhere with good footing, somewhere from which they can finally start building up instead of just holding on. "Good," she said, "then so am I." He hung up. He sat in the quiet of the apartment, the radiator, knocking the upstairs a neighbor, moving through her inverted schedule, the ordinary sounds of a building full of people living their lives on different tracks in the same small space. He took the coat off and hung it on the hook by the door, the same hook it had been on since he moved in. He looked at it there for a moment. Heavy canvas, wool lining the color of oatmeal, 2 patch pockets on the front, frayed left cuff he'd been meaning to mend for 2 years and that he now thought he might actually get around to. His father had bought it in 1987 and worn it for 23 years. Ethan had worn it for 6. Harper Reynolds had worn it for 2 weeks in the coldest part of a Montana January, and she had given it back with both hands carefully, the way you return something you've understood the value of. It had been through blizzards. It had covered a man making payments on a debt he hadn't fully understood, and a girl running through the cold from people who thought a human being could be converted into a claim. It had been in an alley on 2nd Avenue at the exact moment it needed to be, because Ethan Cole was the kind of man who stopped when he heard a sound that other men's feet kept walking past. The coat had never let anyone down. Ethan Cole turned off the light. He went to bed. He slept without dreaming the deep, even sleep of a man who had come through something, who had done what needed doing, who had people in his corner now that he hadn't had 3 weeks ago, and who was going to wake up in the morning and open his own garage. He was no longer surviving. He was building. And for a man raised by Raymond Cole in a coat that had weathered every hard winter Montana had ever sent, that was exactly enough. "Give me 5 minutes," the boy said. The parking lot went dead silent. Logan Steele, 6'2", 240 pounds of pure intimidation, president of the most feared motorcycle club in America, stared down at this teenager like he was looking at something stuck to the bottom of his boot. 5 minutes, Logan repeated slowly. The crowd held its breath. Then someone laughed. Then everyone laughed. Nobody laughed harder than the 23 master mechanics who had already failed. If you are watching this right now, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me, because what happened next in that Phoenix parking lot will shake you to your core. The Iron Ghost had been silent for 3 days. Not sleeping, not resting, silent the way only dead things go silent completely finally, without any promise of returning. 3 days earlier, it had been the centerpiece of the Southwest Regional Charity Ride, a machine so rare and so celebrated that people had driven from 11 different states just to stand beside it for a photograph. A one-of-a-kind custom Harley-Davidson built over 12 years by hand. Every component sourced individually, tracked down across junkyards and estate sales and private collections scattered from Montana to Mississippi. Every weld, every pipe, every bracket personal. The kind of motorcycle that stopped being a vehicle somewhere around year 6 and became something closer to a confession. Logan Steele had put his hands on every inch of it, had rebuilt sections 3 and 4 times until they felt right, had turned down 2 separate offers above $4 million without blinking, not because he needed the money, but because some things aren't for sale. And now it was dead. The engine had seized somewhere outside Flagstaff on a Tuesday morning. No warning, no gradual decline, no coughing or stuttering that might have given Logan a few seconds to pull over gracefully. One moment, the Iron Ghost was running at full power on the open highway with 60 riders behind him, and the next moment, it simply stopped. Logan had coasted to the shoulder with the kind of controlled calm that comes from 28 years of riding, but everyone close enough to see his face knew what was happening underneath that calm. Something in him had cracked. The machine sat in his enclosed trailer. Now doors rolled back and locked open so the 140 people gathered in this Phoenix parking lot could see it clearly. Someone had set up portable lighting. Someone else had arranged a loose perimeter of orange cones that absolutely nobody was respecting. Members of the local Hells Angels chapter moved through the crowd in clusters, arms crossed, watching the latest mechanic attempt what the previous 22 had already failed to accomplish. The current mechanic was a man named Riordan, 53 years old, factory certified on Harley-Davidson platforms since 1994, brought in from a dealership in Tucson that had a wall of plaques and trophies visible from the street. He had been working for 90 minutes. He had diagnostic equipment that cost more than most people's cars. He had 2 assistants holding tablets and laptops cross-referencing technical manuals in real time. He had experience. He had credentials. He had everything a person was supposed to need, and he had nothing. I'm telling you, Logan. Riordan straightened up and wiped his hands on a shop rag that was already black past saving. I have never seen a failure pattern like this. It's not the ignition system. It's not a fuel delivery issue. The electrics read clean on 3 separate diagnostic runs. Whatever killed this engine, it left no fingerprints. He hesitated, and in 28 years, nobody had ever watched Riordan hesitate. I'm out of moves. Logan stood 6 feet away with his arms at his sides. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't pacing. He wasn't doing any of the things people expected from a man with his reputation when things went badly wrong. He just stood there looking at the motorcycle with an expression that was harder to watch than anger would have been. "You're done," he said. It wasn't a question. Riordan nodded once and began packing his equipment. Someone in the crowd said something low and mean about Riordan's competence, and a few people laughed, and Riordan kept packing without looking up because there was nothing to say. He was the 23rd expert, the 23rd person to stand in front of that machine with full confidence and walk away empty-handed. At some point, the sheer number stops being about any individual failure and starts being about the machine itself. Something had gone wrong inside the Iron Ghost that didn't follow the rules that mechanics learned. That wasn't supposed to be possible, but the evidence was sitting right there on 4 wheels, and it wasn't running. Logan pulled out his phone. He made a call that lasted 45 seconds. Then he climbed up on the back of a pickup truck that someone had pulled alongside the trailer, and he looked out over the crowd and he said 5 words. $5.2 million. The crowd noise cut off like someone had thrown a switch. "I am offering every cent I have tied up in this machine to whoever makes it run." He said it the way you say something you've been carrying for 72 hours and finally decided to put down. No drama in his voice. Just wait. Not the insurance value, not some negotiated settlement, the full amount. $5,200,000. Cash equivalent. Verified. Transferred the same day. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you come from. You make this engine start, the money is yours. 20 seconds of absolute silence. Then the crowd erupted. Phones came out. Video started rolling. Someone posted it before Logan had even climbed back down from the truck, and by the time his boots hit the pavement, the number was already climbing it on 3 different platforms. 5.2 million. For fixing a motorcycle. The story hit motorcycle forums first, then automotive communities, then general interest feeds, and inside 4 hours, it had crossed into mainstream news. By the following morning, Phoenix was getting visitors who had driven through the night. They kept coming, and they kept failing. A restoration specialist from California arrived with a team of 4. He was known for returning museum-piece motorcycles to working condition machines that had been sitting in collections for decades. He spent 6 hours on the Iron Ghost and left without speaking to anyone. A retired factory engineer who had worked on the original design specifications for several of the components flew in from Milwaukee. He had access to proprietary technical documentation that wasn't available to the public. He worked for 2 days. He called colleagues. He cross-referenced records. He told Logan on the morning of the 3rd day that he believed the motorcycle had experienced a cascade failure sequence that might be genuinely unrepeatable, which meant it might be genuinely unfixable, and Logan had listened to every word without expression and then thanked him for his time. A collector with contacts across 3 continents made calls to people who made calls to other people. 2 additional specialists arrived, both left frustrated. The crowd had thinned from its first-day peak, but never disappeared entirely. There was something about the combination of the machine, the money, and the impossibility that kept people coming back. Logan stayed present through all of it. Not because he had nothing else to do, he had a chapter to run and responsibilities that didn't pause for personal crises, but because the Iron Ghost was his, and walking away from it felt like conceding something he wasn't ready to concede. On the morning of the 4th day, Ethan Walker walked into the parking lot. He came on foot. Nobody had a car at 18 when every dollar went somewhere more urgent, and the walk from the apartment he shared with his grandmother was 40 minutes each way. But that was fine because Ethan had been walking everywhere for 2 years, and your legs stopped complaining about distance eventually. He was carrying a backpack that held the tools he'd accumulated over the past several years. Nothing expensive, nothing new, a collection of instruments that had been acquired secondhand or salvaged or borrowed and never returned, because the person he'd borrowed from had told him to keep them. His jeans had grease stains that didn't come out no matter how many times they went through the wash. His work boots had been repaired twice in places where the sole was separating because new boots cost what 2 full shifts at the warehouse paid, and there were more critical things to spend that on. He'd heard about the Iron Ghost the same way everyone else had. Online then from a guy at the gas station where he worked mornings, then from his grandmother who had seen it mentioned on the evening news. $5 million was not a number that passed through Ethan Walker's world in any practical sense. He understood it intellectually the way you understand the distance to another star accurately, but without any real physical feeling attached to it. He wasn't there for the money. Or he was, but not in the way that most of the people who had shown up were there for the money. He was there because the description of what had gone wrong with the Iron Ghost had been nagging at him since the first time he read about it, the way a particular sound nags at you when you know what it means and nobody else in the room seems to hear it. He stood at the edge of the perimeter for a while and looked at the motorcycle from a distance. People moved around him without noticing him. He was easy not to notice, young, quiet, wearing nothing that signaled authority or expertise or money. He watched the current mechanic work for about 15 minutes and felt his understanding of the problem shift and settle into something more specific. Then he walked up to the nearest Hells Angels member, a broad man in his 40s with a beard down to his chest, and said, "I want to look at the motorcycle." The man looked at him the way you look at something unexpected that hasn't yet been determined to be either funny or a problem. "You a mechanic?" "I know engines," Ethan said. "So did 23 other guys." The man wasn't hostile exactly. He was managing something, a situation that had become complicated and exhausting and was no longer generating the kind of results that made the complication worthwhile. "How old are you?" 18, the man studied him for a moment. Then he said, "Wait here," and walked toward Logan. Ethan waited. He shifted his backpack once and looked at the motorcycle and went back to working through what he understood about its failure. Around him, people moved and talked and filmed themselves, explaining what they already knew about the situation to audiences they were building in real time. Two men near him were having a loud conversation about what was probably wrong with the engine, and neither of them was close, and Ethan didn't say anything because unsolicited corrections rarely helped anyone. Logan came over. He looked at Ethan the way Ethan had expected to be looked at, not cruelly, but with the specific kind of assessment that asks in a single glance what you have to offer that everyone before you didn't. "You think you can fix it?" Logan said. "Not a question either." "I think I understand what's wrong with it to you," Ethan said. "That's what 23 other people said." "I know." Logan was quiet for a moment. Behind him, members of his chapter were watching the exchange with expressions ranging from curious to openly skeptical. One of them said something under his breath that got a short laugh from two others. Logan didn't turn around. "What's your name?" "Ethan Walker." "You got credentials?" "Ethan Walker." "No, sir." "You got any diagnostic equipment?" Ethan glanced at his backpack. "Basic tools." "You got any formal training?" "No." "Then what exactly?" Logan said, and his voice had settled into something very flat and very quiet that was more serious than anger. "Makes you think you should be standing here right now?" Ethan took a breath, not a nervous breath, a breath like someone taking in information before answering carefully. "Because I've been listening to what people say is wrong with it," he said, "and I think they're all looking at the problem from the wrong direction. They're treating it as one failure. It's not one failure. I think it's 4 separate failures that happened in sequence. And the reason nobody's finding the fix is because they're looking for one answer instead of 4. He paused. "I could be wrong, but I'd know in 5 minutes whether I'm right." The laugh came from behind Logan before Logan could respond. A guy named Decker, who had been riding with the chapter for 11 years and had strong opinions about most things, said, "5 minutes. Kid says 5 minutes." The laughter spread outward from Decker in a wave and caught the people nearby who hadn't heard the conversation but heard the laughter and joined it because something was clearly funny. Logan didn't laugh. He held Ethan's gaze for a long moment that felt like several different things happening at once: resentment, doubt, something that might have been curiosity if you pressed the point. Then he said, 5 minutes. Clock starts when you touch it." Ethan nodded. "And if you're wrong," Logan said, "then I've wasted 5 minutes." Ethan said, "Same as everyone else." Nobody had an answer to that, so Ethan walked past all of them toward the Iron Ghost, and the crowd parted without quite meaning to, and someone started the timer on their phone. He placed both hands flat on the tank first. Not for any mystical reason, his father had taught him that, not to listen in some poetic sense, but in a completely practical one. Metal transfers information, temperature differentials, vibration memory, the physical evidence of what a machine has been through. It's all there if you know what you're feeling for. He moved his hands slowly. He wasn't performing. He was reading. 30 seconds in, he said without turning around, "Does anyone have the software diagnostic history from the initial failure? Not the mechanic reports, the raw data from the bike's own system." Silence. Then a voice behind him said, "We pulled that on day 1. It read clean." "I know it read clean," Ethan said. "I want to see the read clean data." Another silence. Then Logan's voice, "Somebody pull that up." Ethan spent another 40 seconds with his hands on the engine casing while someone located the file. When they handed him a tablet, he looked at it for less than a minute, not reading slowly, reading the way people read things they already mostly know and are confirming. He handed it back. 4 failures, he said. He turned around now and faced the crowd for the first time since approaching the motorcycle. There were maybe 120 people watching him. Some of them had been watching for days. Some were filming. Some were just tired and waiting for him to fail so the episode could end. The timing synchronization sensor has a specific fault pattern that only shows in the raw data if you know what deviation to look for. Factory threshold is plus or minus 2%. This one was at 1.8. Flagged internally, not externally, because it's inside tolerance. But it's trending. He let that land. The grounding circuit on the secondary electrical path has a resistance fault. Intermittent. It was probably fine for years and then it wasn't. But because it's intermittent, it doesn't show consistently on diagnostics. He watched the faces of the mechanics in the crowd and saw one of them, a woman in her 40s who had arrived that morning from Denver, go very still. She'd heard something she recognized. Third is a hairline fracture in the fuel pressure housing. You need a specific light angle to see it, and you need to know exactly where to look. It wouldn't cost